My name is Claire, and I am 28 years old. 7 months ago, my entire world was completely obliterated when my husband David, a senior financial analyst, was killed instantly by a distracted driver. I was 6 months pregnant with our first child, and the sudden, devastating trauma completely paralyzed me. I ended up hospitalized with severe stress complications, terrified I was going to lose the baby too. My parents, Richard and Barbara, immediately stepped in to help. While I was lying in a sterile hospital bed hooked up to fetal monitors, my father convinced me to sign a temporary financial power of attorney. He held my hand, looked me directly in the eyes, and told me he just wanted to manage all the stressful paperwork so I could focus entirely on keeping myself and my baby safe. I trusted him with my life. I let him handle the incoming payout of David's standard $500,000 life insurance policy. But 3 weeks later, when I finally felt strong enough to log into my banking portal to pay the final invoice for my dead husband's headstone, the screen did not show $500,000. It showed an available balance of exactly $412. The entire $500,000 was completely gone. Before I tell you exactly where my parents hid my money and how a hidden second insurance policy completely destroyed their lives, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Olivia Tells Stories. But only do this if you genuinely enjoy stories where greedy people get exactly what they deserve. Also, please drop a comment below telling me your age, your city, and what time you are listening to this right now. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now let me take you back to the afternoon my entire reality shattered. I sat at my small kitchen table staring at the glowing computer screen until my eyes physically burned. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely type in my password a second time just to make sure it was not some horrible system error. But the terrible numbers remained exactly the same, $412. I immediately picked up my phone and called my bank. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I waited on hold. The customer service representative finally answered and confirmed my absolute worst nightmare. A massive wire transfer had been initiated 2 days prior, clearing out the entire life insurance payout. She told me the transfer was entirely legal because it was fully authorized and executed by the designated holder of my financial power of attorney, my own father. I hung up the phone and a cold, suffocating wave of panic washed over my entire body. I was carrying a child. I was a widow at 28. That money was the only safety net David had left behind to ensure his daughter would be taken care of. I dialed my father's cell phone number, my fingers slipping on the glass screen. It rang 3 times and went straight to voicemail. I called my mother, Barbara, straight to voicemail. A dark, sickening realization began to settle into the pit of my stomach. They were actively ignoring me. They knew exactly what they had done, and they were hiding. But they severely underestimated the protective rage of a grieving mother. I sat in my apartment clutching my phone, my knuckles completely white. My father, Richard, and my mother, Barbara, were deliberately ignoring my calls. They had been my absolute pillars of support since the police officer knocked on my door to tell me David was gone. Or so I had thought. My breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. I opened a location sharing application on my mobile phone. We had all synced our locations a month ago when my severe pregnancy complications started, so they could easily find me in the event of a medical emergency. Now I was using that exact same application to hunt them down. A small blue dot representing my mother's phone was completely stationary at an address I did not recognize. It was located in a highly affluent suburban neighborhood about 30 minutes north of the city limits. I grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter. Getting into the driver's seat of my small sedan was incredibly difficult. At 6 months pregnant, my center of gravity had completely shifted, and the physical weight of my belly combined with the suffocating weight of my fresh grief made every single movement agonizing. But adrenaline is a terrifyingly powerful fuel. I drove, strictly obeying the speed limit because I could not risk anything happening to my unborn daughter, but my mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour. Every red light felt like a deliberate taunt. I kept replaying the image of my bank account balance in my head. $412. They had wiped out the only safety net my dead husband had left for us. I turned my car onto a wide, pristine street lined with massive old oak trees and perfectly manicured green lawns. The houses in this particular subdivision were sprawling custom estates with 3-car garages and expensive professional landscaping. It was the kind of neighborhood where people hired private security and drove imported luxury vehicles. I slowly rolled down the quiet street, checking the house numbers against the digital location pin on my phone screen. I finally spotted my mother's silver sedan parked in the wide circular driveway of a stunning, newly renovated 4-bedroom home. The exterior was painted a crisp modern white with expensive dark wood accents and massive custom bay windows. And standing right in the middle of the lush green front lawn was my younger sister, Jessica. Jessica is 26 years old, and she has never held a traditional job in her entire adult life. While I spent years building a modest but stable career as a freelance illustrator, pulling all-nighters to meet client deadlines and paying my own way, Jessica decided early on that she was going to be a luxury lifestyle influencer. My parents had fully funded her delusion from day one. They paid her expensive city rent, they bought her professional lighting equipment, and they constantly bailed her out whenever her premium credit cards maxed out. She was their absolute golden child. She was the beautiful, charismatic daughter who was supposed to make the family famous and elevate their social status. Right at that exact moment, Jessica was posing dramatically in front of the massive oak front doors of the house. She was wearing a brand new designer outfit, flipping her perfectly styled hair, and smiling brightly, while my mother Barbara snapped dozens of photos on her professional camera. My father Richard stood on the expansive front porch with his hands resting on his hips, looking at the real estate with an expression of immense, arrogant pride. They looked like a picture-perfect happy family. They looked like they were celebrating a massive lottery win. They were celebrating with the blood money of my dead husband. I slammed my car into park and shoved the heavy door open. I practically fell out of the vehicle, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean against the hot metal frame just to steady myself. "What are you doing?" I screamed, my voice echoing loudly down the quiet, wealthy street. The three of them instantly froze. My mother lowered her camera, her eyes widening in sudden shock. Jessica dropped her ridiculous influencer pose, looking incredibly annoyed that her impromptu photo shoot had been interrupted by her grieving pregnant sister. My father, however, did not look surprised. He did not look guilty. He slowly walked down the front steps of the house, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at my tear-stained face and my swollen pregnant belly with absolute cold condescension. "Where is my money?" I demanded, marching up the paved driveway. "Where is David's life insurance? I just checked the bank portal and the entire account has been completely wiped out." My father let out a heavy sigh as if he were dealing with a completely irrational toddler. "Calm down, Claire," he said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly even. "You are going to raise your blood pressure, and that is not good for the baby. We did not take your money. We protected it. We put it into something tangible." I stared at him, completely uncomprehending. "Tangible?" I repeated the word, feeling a fresh wave of panic rising in my throat. "What are you talking about?" My father gestured broadly to the massive white house standing behind him. "We bought this property," he stated proudly. "We bought it outright, in cash, today. It is a fantastic investment in a highly appreciating neighborhood. Jessica is going to live here. It is going to be the perfect, gorgeous backdrop for her lifestyle brand." The sheer audacity of his words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I actually stumbled backward, gasping for air. "You stole my dead husband's life insurance to buy Jessica a content house?" I shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my younger sister. My mother quickly stepped forward, adjusting her expensive designer sunglasses. "Do not use that ugly word, Claire," she scolded, her tone dripping with toxic motherly disappointment. "Nobody stole anything from you. You are a freelance illustrator, sweetie. You draw pictures for a living. You have absolutely no head for serious financial numbers, and you are entirely too emotional right now to manage a $500,000 windfall. We knew that if we left that money in your personal account, you would just waste it all on silly grief therapies, expensive baby clothes, and unnecessary hospital upgrades. We are holding the wealth in the family where it truly belongs. Jessica needs absolute stability to grow her internet brand, and this house guarantees she will never have to worry about rent again. I felt the entire world spinning violently around me. They had literally rationalized stripping a pregnant widow of her only financial safety net simply because they believed my sister's fake internet career was more important than my actual survival. They did not view me as a grieving daughter who had just lost the love of her life. They viewed my tragic loss as their ultimate financial opportunity to fund their favorite child. "You cannot do this," I sobbed, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach. "That money is for my daughter. It is the only thing David left her. I will call the police. I will call a lawyer and have you both arrested for grand larceny." My father let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. He stepped closer, looking down at me with an expression of absolute, arrogant triumph. "Call whoever you want, Claire," he challenged quietly. "You willingly signed a comprehensive financial power of attorney, giving me full, explicit legal authority to manage, distribute, and invest those funds as I saw fit. I executed a perfectly legal real estate transaction. The deed is officially registered in a private family trust. Any lawyer will tell you the exact same thing. And even if you tried to fight it in civil court, you currently have exactly $400 to your name. You cannot even afford to hire a paralegal, let alone a corporate litigation team. You are completely out of options. So go home, rest your body, and let the adults handle the family finances." I stood in that pristine driveway completely broken. My father was right. He held the legal paperwork, and he held all the money. I was entirely defenseless. Jessica rolled her eyes heavily and told me to stop being so incredibly hormonal and selfish, ruining her big moving day. I turned around and walked back to my car, the heavy, suffocating weight of total defeat crushing my spirit. I cried so hard on the drive back to my apartment that I had to pull my car over to the side of the road because my vision was entirely blurred by hot tears. I rested my head against the steering wheel, sobbing for David, sobbing for my unborn baby, and sobbing for the family I had just permanently lost. But as I sat there, drowning in absolute despair, a sudden, sharp memory pierced directly through the thick, dark fog of my grief. It was a memory from exactly 1 year ago. David had handed me a small, heavy brass key. He told me it belonged to a highly secure private lockbox at his downtown corporate law firm. "If anything ever happens to me, you go straight to Mr. Harrison," he had whispered, pressing the key into my palm. I wiped my face, my sorrow instantly transmuting into burning, white-hot rage. I put the car in drive and headed straight downtown, because my parents thought they had stolen everything, but they had absolutely no idea what that little brass key was about to unlock. I navigated my small sedan through the heavy afternoon traffic of the downtown financial district. The towering glass and steel skyscrapers loomed over me, casting long, dark shadows across the crowded pavement. Just an hour ago, I had been standing in a pristine suburban driveway, listening to my own father proudly admit that he had stolen $500,000 from his pregnant, widowed daughter. I felt completely shattered and entirely alone. But as I pulled up to the massive corporate headquarters where my late husband David had worked for 7 years, my profound grief began to harden into a sharp, desperate determination. I parked my car in the underground garage and rode the sleek, mirror-lined elevator up to the top floor. I gripped the small, heavy brass key in my sweating palm so tightly that the jagged metal edges bit directly into my skin. I stepped out into the plush reception area of the executive legal team. The space was incredibly intimidating. It featured rich mahogany wall panels, imported marble floors, and massive windows overlooking the sprawling city skyline. It was an environment built entirely on power and absolute financial authority. I approached the polished reception desk and quietly asked to speak with Mr. Harrison. I did not have an appointment. I did not have a fancy retainer agreement. All I had was my swollen, pregnant belly, my tear-stained face, and the tiny brass key David had given me a year before he died. The receptionist took one look at my fragile state and immediately picked up her desk phone. Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy oak double doors at the end of the hallway swung open. A tall, distinguished man in his mid-50s, wearing a custom-tailored navy suit, walked quickly toward me. This was James Harrison. He was the senior corporate estate attorney for the firm and a man known for being an absolute shark in the courtroom. He did not suffer fools, and he certainly did not tolerate corporate vulnerabilities. But when he looked at me, his sharp, piercing eyes softened with genuine compassion. "Claire," he said gently, reaching out to gently guide me by the shoulder, "I am so incredibly sorry for your loss. David was one of the sharpest, most brilliant financial analysts this firm has ever seen. We have all been entirely devastated by his passing. Please come back to my office." I followed him down the long, quiet corridor and into his massive corner suite. He gestured for me to sit in a luxurious leather armchair and offered me a glass of water. I did not take a sip. I simply reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the small brass key, and placed it directly onto the center of his massive glass desk. It landed with a heavy metallic clink that echoed in the quiet room. "David told me to bring this to you if anything ever happened," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He said you would know exactly what it unlocks." Mr. Harrison stared at the brass key for a long, heavy moment. A look of deep, profound respect crossed his face. He picked up the key, walked around his desk, and approached a heavily fortified steel filing cabinet completely hidden behind a decorative wood panel in the corner of his office. He inserted the brass key, turned it twice, and pulled open a heavy reinforced drawer. He reached inside and extracted a massive, thick black leather binder. He carried it back to his desk and set it down right in front of me. "Claire," he began, taking his seat and folding his hands carefully over the leather cover. David was not just an employee here. He was a highly valued senior executive who understood the complex architecture of wealth protection better than anyone I have ever met. He knew his standard $500,000 life insurance policy was simply a baseline provision. But more importantly, he knew exactly who your parents were. I looked up at him in surprise. David was always perfectly polite to my parents, Richard and Barbara. He attended their holiday dinners, and he always bought my sister Jessica generous birthday gifts. But I suddenly realized that behind his polite smiles, his brilliant analytical mind had been constantly evaluating them. He had watched my parents coddle Jessica. He had watched them demand unreasonable financial sacrifices from me. He had accurately diagnosed their toxic greed long before I ever had the courage to admit it to myself. David knew your family possessed a deeply ingrained sense of financial entitlement. Harrison continued opening the heavy black binder and flipping through several thick parchment pages. He was terrified that if anything tragic ever happened to him, your parents would attempt to exploit your gentle nature and your grief. He was especially worried about how they would treat you if you were ever left alone with a child. So he came to me directly and asked me to construct an impenetrable financial fortress around his family. Mr. Harrison turned a densely typed legal document around and pushed it across the glass desk toward me. He tapped his expensive silver pen against a specific bolded paragraph. "This is David's secondary, corporate-backed executive life insurance policy," Harrison explained, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "It is an exclusive benefit provided only to our top-tier analysts. It bypasses standard probate courts and is entirely insulated from any traditional family trust interference. The total guaranteed payout of this secondary policy is exactly $2.5 million. I completely stopped breathing. $2.5 million. The sheer astronomical magnitude of that number short-circuited my exhausted brain. My parents had callously destroyed my entire life and permanently shattered our family over $500,000. They thought they had successfully stolen the entire pie. They had absolutely no idea they had only scraped a tiny crumb off the table. However, Harrison said, raising a single finger to command my absolute attention, "There is a highly specific catch. David intentionally structured this executive policy with a strict corporate fiduciary protection clause. Because this is a firm-sponsored asset, we maintain a vested legal interest in ensuring it is properly distributed. The clause explicitly states that if any external party commits fraud, manipulation, or abuses a legal mechanism to misappropriate your primary funds, this firm's aggressive corporate litigation team is automatically retained on your behalf. We are legally authorized to completely destroy the offending parties and aggressively recover the stolen assets." The heavy weight of his words settled over me. David had essentially hired an entire army of corporate apex predators to watch over me from the grave. I looked Mr. Harrison directly in the eyes. I felt the tears welling up again, but this time they were not tears of helpless sorrow. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude for a husband who loved me enough to anticipate my worst nightmare. My father had me sign a temporary financial power of attorney while I was hospitalized with pregnancy complications. I confessed, my voice steadying with every single word. I trusted him. But this morning I discovered he used that legal authority to completely drain the $500,000 primary policy. He wired every single penny out of my account. I tracked them down to a wealthy suburban neighborhood an hour ago. He used my dead husband's money to buy a massive 4-bedroom house in cash for my sister Jessica, so she could have a nice backdrop for her internet lifestyle brand. He told me I would just waste the money and that he was keeping the wealth in the family. Mr. Harrison went perfectly, entirely still. The sympathetic compassion he had shown me when I first walked into his office instantly vanished. It was completely replaced by the cold, calculating gaze of a corporate shark who had just smelled blood in the water. A dark, terrifyingly confident smile slowly spread across his face. "Abusing a medical financial power of attorney for personal family enrichment is textbook grand larceny," Harrison whispered, leaning forward over the desk. "It is a massive, catastrophic federal felony. Your father did not just steal from a pregnant widow today, Claire. He essentially signed his own financial death warrant." A fierce protective heat bloomed in my chest. "Can we take the house back?" I asked. "Can we get David's money back for my baby?" "We can do far more than just take the house back," Harrison assured me, his eyes flashing with brilliant legal strategy. "The secondary $2.5 million policy is now fully unlocked and ready for secure transfer into an untouchable trust. But I am not going to let your parents simply walk away from the primary theft. If we file a standard civil lawsuit, your father will try to drag it out for years, claiming he acted in your best interest. He will use your own stolen money to hire defense lawyers. We are not going to give him that opportunity." Harrison closed the black binder with a loud, resounding snap. To trigger the corporate litigation clause instantly and bypass a lengthy civil trial, we need an open and shut criminal case. We need your parents to arrogantly confess to the fraud explicitly on the record. We need them to admit they intentionally diverted the funds to buy that specific house for your sister. I sat back in my leather chair, my mind racing. My parents were greedy and entitled, but they were not completely stupid. If a corporate lawyer suddenly called them demanding answers, they would immediately hire counsel and hide behind the broad legal language of the power of attorney document. They would lie and claim I had verbally authorized the real estate purchase. I needed to trick them into feeling so completely powerful and untouchable that they would openly brag about their brilliant financial maneuver. "I can get them to confess," I said. a cold, hard clarity washing over my entire body. I know exactly how their toxic egos work. If I play the role of the helpless, broken widow and offer them another piece of financial bait, they will walk right into whatever trap we set. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked at me with deep, professional approval. "You are very much like David," he noted softly. "Tell me exactly what you need me to do." I outlined my plan right there in his office. I was going to go back to my tiny apartment and play the perfect, pathetic victim. I was going to text them pleading messages about my struggles to afford basic necessities. I was going to let them feel like they had completely won the war. And then, when their guards were completely down, I was going to lure them directly into the firm's glass-walled boardroom with the promise of more free money. They had absolutely no idea that their greedy pursuit of a few extra dollars was about to march them straight into a spectacular, catastrophic legal slaughterhouse. I walked out of the towering glass skyscraper and stepped onto the busy downtown pavement. The afternoon sun hit my face, and for the very first time since the police officer knocked on my front door to tell me David was gone, I did not feel like a helpless victim. I felt like a loaded weapon. Mr. Harrison had given me the exact blueprint to completely decimate the people who had exploited my grief. But to execute this flawless corporate strike, I had to do the most psychologically agonizing thing imaginable. I had to go back to my tiny apartment and actively play the role of the defeated, pathetic widow. For the next 14 days, I completely swallowed my pride and delivered an absolute masterclass in deception. I stayed inside my cramped living space, eating cheap canned soup and staring at the peeling paint on my walls. Meanwhile, my sister Jessica was busy uploading daily video tours of her brand new, massive 4-bedroom house. She showed off the imported marble kitchen island and the expensive hardwood floors that my dead husband had unknowingly paid for. Every time I saw her smiling face on my phone screen, a fresh wave of blinding rage washed over me. But I channeled that intense fury directly into my performance. I needed my parents to feel so incredibly powerful and untouchable that their toxic egos would blind them to any potential danger. I started by sending a series of carefully crafted, desperate text messages to my mother, Barbara. I wrote, "Mom, I am really struggling to buy groceries this week. The hospital bills from my pregnancy complications are piling up, and my checking account is completely empty. Could you please loan me $200 just so I can buy some maternity vitamins and fresh food?" Her response was exactly the kind of sickening, patronizing garbage I expected. She texted back, "Claire, sweetie, you need to learn how to budget your freelance income better. Your father and I just spent a fortune setting up your sister in her new home so she can finally launch her lifestyle brand. We are financially tied up right now. Maybe you should look into government assistance programs until you get back on your feet." I screenshotted that message immediately. My mother was actively telling her 6-month pregnant widowed daughter to go on welfare while sitting in a $500,000 house bought with my stolen life insurance. I then turned my attention to my father, Richard. I called him, crying real tears because the stress of the situation was genuinely overwhelming. I begged him to release just $10,000 from the original insurance payout so I could put a small deposit down on a safer apartment before the baby arrived. My father used his absolute favorite condescending tone. He told me that the funds were securely tied up in real estate investments and that liquidating them now would incur massive tax penalties. He reminded me that I had willingly signed the financial power of attorney and firmly suggested I stop harassing him about money he was protecting for the greater good of the family. He felt like an absolute king ruling over his pathetic, broke daughter. They had taken the bait perfectly. They truly believed I was completely helpless and financially ruined. They thought the $500,000 well had run completely dry and that they had gotten away with the perfect crime. It was finally time to spring the trap. I sat down at my small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and drafted a highly formal email directly to my father. I knew that trying to command him to come to a lawyer's office would instantly trigger his defensive suspicions. I had to appeal to the one thing that completely controlled his entire existence: unadulterated greed. I typed out the message with shaking hands. "Dad," I wrote, "I just received a certified letter from David's corporate law firm downtown. The senior estate attorney, Mr. Harrison, needs to do a final wrap-up of the basic employment files. Apparently, David had a small residual corporate bonus check waiting to be cleared from his last quarter of work. The total amount is $15,000. However, because you are the legal holder of the financial power of attorney, the firm requires you to be physically present to sign the release forms and officially claim the funds. The meeting is scheduled for this coming Thursday at 10 in the morning in their executive boardroom." $15,000. It was a completely fabricated number, but I knew it was the exact perfect amount to trigger their insatiable hunger for free money. It was enough cash to buy brand new luxury furniture for Jessica's stolen house, but not a sum so massively large that it would arouse suspicion. I hit send and watched the little progress bar shoot across the screen. I did not even have time to stand up and walk to my kitchen sink before my cell phone vibrated violently against the table. The reply came through in exactly 3 minutes. My father responded with extreme enthusiasm. "Claire," he wrote, "I will absolutely be there on Thursday morning. It is a good thing you signed that proxy paperwork. Otherwise, you would probably lose this bonus check to bureaucratic taxes. I will handle the legal release forms and make sure the $15,000 is deposited directly into the family trust to help furnish Jessica's new living room. See you at 10. He had not only agreed to show up, but he had just admitted in writing that he planned to immediately misappropriate the new funds for his favorite child before he even had the check in his hands. It was a spectacular display of staggering arrogance. But the absolute cherry on top of this miserable cake happened the next afternoon. Jessica actually called me herself. It was the first time she had initiated contact since the day I confronted them in her pristine driveway. She did not call to ask how my pregnancy was progressing or how I was coping with the loss of my husband. She called to tell me that she was going to accompany my father to the law firm on Thursday. "I want to pick out a custom Italian leather sectional sofa for the media room," she chirped brightly into the phone, "and I need to make sure Dad gives me the bonus check immediately so I can place the order before the weekend. Do not worry, Claire. You can come over and sit on it once the baby is born." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. "That sounds wonderful, Jessica," I replied, forcing my voice to sound entirely defeated and compliant. "I will see you both at the lawyer's office." I hung up the phone, and a dark, terrifyingly cold smile slowly spread across my face. They were all coming. My father, my mother, and my utterly entitled sister. They were happily dressing up in their expensive clothes, completely blinded by their endless greed, eager to collect another free paycheck from a dead man. They thought they were walking into a basic administrative meeting to collect a small bonus. They had absolutely no idea they were enthusiastically marching directly into a corporate legal slaughterhouse that would permanently incinerate their entire lives. Thursday morning arrived with a bright, unforgiving sun shining across the city skyline. I woke up early feeling a chaotic mixture of deep physical exhaustion and electric, terrifying anticipation. I put on a simple, dark maternity dress that I had purchased on clearance months ago. I did not want to look polished or put together. I needed to look exactly like the broken, defeated widow they expected to see. I drove myself to the downtown financial district, navigating the morning rush hour traffic while resting one hand protectively over my swollen belly. My baby was kicking actively against my ribs as if she could sense the massive confrontation that was about to unfold. I silently promised her that by the end of this single hour, her entire future would be permanently secured. I took the private elevator up to the executive legal floor of David's corporate firm. The receptionist recognized me immediately and offered a warm, sympathetic nod, silently escorting me back toward the massive glass-walled boardroom. I was the first one to arrive. The room was incredibly imposing, designed to intimidate rival corporate lawyers and host multi-million-dollar settlement negotiations. A massive, polished mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by 20 heavy leather ergonomic chairs. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying panoramic view of the bustling city streets far below. I took a seat near the back corner of the room, resting my hands on my lap and taking slow, deep breaths to steady my racing heart. Exactly 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open, and my family made their grand entrance. They did not look like people who were attending a legal meeting to finalize the estate of a tragically deceased son-in-law. They looked like they were walking the red carpet at a luxury fashion event. My mother, Barbara, entered first, carrying a brand-new designer leather handbag that easily cost $3,000. She was wearing expensive gold jewelry that clinked softly against her wrist as she walked. My father, Richard, followed closely behind her, wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit that looked suspiciously crisp and entirely brand new. And finally, my younger sister, Jessica, practically bounced into the room, wearing a high-end designer trench coat and holding an oversized iced coffee. They had clearly been on a massive shopping spree, funded entirely by the $500,000 they had stolen from my bank account. The sheer visual evidence of their unapologetic greed made my stomach churn with violent nausea. But I forced myself to remain completely still and keep my expression entirely blank. Jessica did not even bother to say hello to me. She immediately walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, pulled out her expensive smartphone, and began taking a series of pouty selfies with the city skyline in the background. My mother took a seat near the head of the mahogany table, smoothing out her expensive skirt and offering me a tight, patronizing smile. "How are you feeling today, Claire?" Barbara asked, her tone lacking any genuine maternal warmth. "You look incredibly tired. Are you making sure to eat enough protein for the baby?" "I am doing the best I can, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice deliberately soft and meek. "It has just been really hard, trying to figure out how I am going to afford everything on my own now." My father scoffed loudly, taking the large leather chair directly next to my mother. He unbuttoned his crisp new suit jacket and leaned back, lacing his fingers together behind his head. He looked around the spectacular corporate boardroom with an expression of immense, arrogant satisfaction, as if he personally owned the entire building. "Well, that is exactly why you need to let the people who understand finances handle the heavy lifting, Claire," my father declared pompously. "You are far too emotional to make rational decisions right now. This is exactly why having that financial power of attorney in place was the smartest thing we could have possibly done for you. Once we secure this $15,000 bonus check today, we can allocate a small portion of it to help you buy a nice new crib. The rest obviously needs to go toward securing Jessica's new property." Jessica stopped taking selfies and spun around, her eyes practically glowing with unearned entitlement. "Oh my gosh, yes," she squealed, clapping her hands together. "I was just looking at the catalog this morning, Dad. I absolutely need that custom Italian leather sectional for the media room. And the imported Calicotta marble for the kitchen island is getting installed tomorrow. It is going to look so incredibly aesthetic for my brand launch. You would absolutely die if you saw it, Claire. The lighting in that house is totally perfect." I sat there listening to them casually divide up my fabricated bonus check to buy luxury furniture for a house they purchased with my stolen life insurance. They felt so entirely untouchable. They were happily dancing on my husband's grave, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet was about to completely give way. Before I could force myself to utter a compliant response, the heavy boardroom doors opened again. Mr. Harrison walked into the room, carrying the massive, thick black leather binder under his left arm. He was dressed in a sharp navy pinstripe suit, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying corporate authority. He did not smile. He did not offer any warm pleasantries. He walked directly to the head of the mahogany table and placed the heavy binder down with a solid, authoritative thud. "Good morning, everyone," Harrison said, his deep voice instantly commanding the complete attention of the entire room. "I am James Harrison, the senior corporate estate attorney representing the firm. I appreciate you all coming down here on such short notice to finalize these remaining administrative matters." My father immediately sat up straight, trying to match the lawyer's commanding posture. He reached into his brand-new suit jacket pocket and pulled out the folded legal proxy document. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," my father said, using his absolute best corporate executive voice. "I am Richard. I am Claire's father and the legally designated holder of her comprehensive financial power of attorney. I am fully authorized to sign any necessary release forms on her behalf to expedite the distribution of David's remaining corporate bonus." Harrison looked at the folded document in my father's hand and offered a tight, completely unreadable smile. "Excellent," Harrison replied smoothly. "That will certainly make this process much more streamlined. However, because this firm operates under highly strict federal compliance regulations regarding the distribution of executive assets, I must formally document this final wrap-up meeting for our corporate records." Harrison reached into his suit pocket, pulled out a small, sleek digital recording device, and placed it directly into the center of the polished mahogany table. He pressed a small button on the side, and a bright red LED light instantly blinked to life, illuminating the dark wood. My parents did not look alarmed by the recording device at all. In fact, my father puffed his chest out even further, clearly enjoying the formal, bureaucratic theater of the moment. He genuinely believed this was just standard corporate red tape standing between him and his free $15,000. He had absolutely no idea that the blinking red light was actually the glowing eye of a legal sniper rifle pointed directly at his forehead. Harrison took his seat at the head of the table, opening the thick black binder. He formally stated the current date, the time, and the full legal names of every single person present in the boardroom for the audio record. The room fell completely silent, save for the soft hum of the central air conditioning system. Richard Harrison began his tone perfectly polite, but carrying a razor-sharp edge of professional inquiry. "Before I can legally authorize the release of the $15,000 residual bonus, I am required by corporate policy to formally verify the disposition of the primary policy payout. As you know, a standard $500,000 life insurance transfer was initiated by this firm 3 weeks ago. My records indicate that those funds were completely removed from Claire's primary banking accounts just 2 days ago." Harrison paused, looking directly into my father's eyes. "Can you confirm for the official record that you utilized your financial power of attorney to execute this massive wire transfer entirely outside of Claire's personal accounts? And can you confirm that this was an intentional, deliberate financial maneuver?" I held my breath, pressing my hands tightly against my pregnant belly. This was the exact moment of truth. If my father lied, if he claimed it was an administrative error or tried to walk back his actions, the trap would fail. But I knew his toxic arrogance would not allow him to share the credit for his brilliant real estate scam. He wanted the lawyer to know how smart he was. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows proudly on the mahogany table, and spoke clearly and directly into the digital microphone. "Yes, Mr. Harrison, that is entirely correct," my father declared, his voice dripping with smug self-satisfaction. "I personally authorized and executed that complete wire transfer. As Claire's legal proxy, I made the executive decision to remove those funds from her direct access. Claire is heavily pregnant and emotionally unstable right now due to her grief. She has absolutely no financial literacy. If I had left that $500,000 in her account, she would have foolishly squandered it on medical upgrades and unnecessary therapies." My mother Barbara nodded enthusiastically in agreement, completely validating his horrible statements. "We had to protect the wealth," she chimed in, leaning toward the microphone. "We had to keep it safe within the family structure." "And exactly how did you secure these funds?" Richard Harrison asked, his voice dangerously calm, baiting the hook for the final lethal strike. We used the entire $500,000 to purchase a luxury 4-bedroom property outright in cash, my father proudly confessed, cementing his own ultimate doom. We placed the deed in a private trust for our other daughter, Jessica. She is building a lucrative lifestyle brand and requires a stable aesthetic environment. It was a perfectly executed real estate investment designed to hold the wealth securely in the family until Claire is mentally fit enough to understand how money actually works. So as you can see, the funds are perfectly safe, and we are completely ready to accept the $15,000 bonus check to finalize the estate. My father leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms with a massive, arrogant smile on his face. He truly believed he had just delivered a masterclass in wealth management to a senior corporate attorney. He had just enthusiastically confessed to felony grand larceny on a recorded corporate audio track. Mr. Harrison stared at my father for a long, heavy moment. The polite administrative facade he had been wearing instantly dissolved. The temperature in the boardroom seemed to plummet 10 degrees in a single second. Harrison slowly reached out his hand and pressed the button on the digital device, completely stopping the recording. "Thank you for that incredibly clear, uncoerced confirmation," Richard Harrison said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, predatory whisper. The senior corporate attorney reached his hands under the heavy mahogany table. He pulled out a second, vastly larger black binder and dropped it onto the glass surface with a booming, explosive thud that made my mother physically jump in her seat. The trap had officially snapped shut, and the absolute devastation of my family was about to officially begin. Mr. Harrison slowly reached his large hand across the polished mahogany table and firmly pressed the small button on the side of the digital recording device. The bright red light instantly blinked out, plunging the small, sleek machine back into cold, dormant silence. The loud clicking sound echoed through the massive glass-walled boardroom with the terrifying absolute finality of a heavy prison door slamming shut. My father, Richard, had absolutely no idea that he had just completely sealed his own fate. He was still sitting back in his expensive ergonomic leather chair, wearing a massive, smug smile, genuinely believing he had just successfully justified his brilliant financial theft to a senior corporate attorney. He actually reached his right hand out slightly, expecting Mr. Harrison to immediately slide a $15,000 bonus check across the table for his signature. But the polite administrative customer service smile had instantly vanished from Mr. Harrison's face. The senior attorney's expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated legal hostility. He looked at my father with the kind of profound clinical disgust usually reserved for toxic parasites. "Thank you for that incredibly clear, uncoerced confirmation, Richard," Mr. Harrison repeated, his voice dropping all pretenses of professional warmth. My father's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He blinked in slight confusion, not entirely understanding the sudden, drastic shift in the temperature of the room. Before he could ask what was happening, Mr. Harrison reached his hands down beneath the heavy wooden table. When he brought them back up, he was holding the massive, thick black leather binder I had seen in his private corner office earlier that week. He lifted the heavy binder high into the air and dropped it directly onto the glass center of the mahogany table. It hit the polished surface with a booming, explosive thud that made my mother Barbara physically jump out of her seat. Her expensive gold bracelets clattered loudly against the wood. Jessica let out a tiny, startled gasp, looking up from her smartphone screen for the very first time since the meeting began. "What is that?" my father asked, his arrogant confidence suddenly wavering as a tiny seed of genuine confusion began to take root in his mind. "I thought we were simply signing the standard release forms for David's residual bonus check. We have a lot of errands to run today, Mr. Harrison." Mr. Harrison rested his large hands flat against the thick black leather cover, staring a hole directly through my father's chest. "We are not here to discuss a $15,000 residual bonus, Richard," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice echoing with cold, terrifying authority. "That bonus does not actually exist. It was a complete fabrication. We are here to discuss David's actual estate. My father's brow furrowed in deep, angry confusion. What do you mean, his actual estate? My father demanded, his tone shifting from smoothly arrogant to highly defensive. I already processed his entire estate. 3 weeks ago, the standard life insurance policy paid out exactly $500,000, and I securely invested it exactly as I just described on your little audio recording. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his sharp, piercing blue eyes locking directly onto my father. You processed the standard entry-level employee death benefit, Richard, Mr. Harrison corrected him smoothly. But David was not a standard entry-level employee. He was a highly valued senior financial analyst for one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in this entire city. And because he possessed a brilliant analytical mind, he accurately predicted that his grieving pregnant widow might be surrounded by opportunistic vultures who would attempt to exploit her extreme vulnerability. My mother let out a highly offended, dramatic gasp, clutching the strap of her brand-new designer handbag. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she sputtered, her face turning a blotchy shade of angry red. "We are her parents. We are actively protecting her financial future." Mr. Harrison completely ignored her ridiculous outburst. He slowly opened the heavy black cover of the binder and flipped to the first densely typed parchment page. Because David understood the exact toxic nature of the people sitting in this room, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice rising in volume and immense power, he intentionally secured a highly exclusive, corporate-backed executive life insurance policy, a policy that entirely bypasses standard probate courts and remains completely insulated from any external family trust interference. Mr. Harrison ran his expensive silver pen down the complex legal page, stopping at a specifically highlighted section near the bottom. He looked up at my family, delivering the financial payload with lethal surgical precision. The total guaranteed payout of David's secondary executive policy is exactly $2.5 million. The sheer astronomical magnitude of that number hit the boardroom like a physical shockwave. $2.5 million. The silence that followed was so absolute you could have heard a single pin drop on the thick carpeted floor. My mother's jaw literally dropped open, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide her staggering shock. Her hands began to tremble violently as her brain desperately tried to process the massive sum of money. Jessica's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. Her fingers went completely slack, and her expensive smartphone slipped directly out of her grip, clattering loudly against the hard mahogany table. She was not thinking about her dead brother-in-law. I could literally see the greedy gears turning in her head, instantly imagining how many luxury sports cars and designer wardrobes she could buy with a multi-million-dollar windfall. But my father's reaction was the most sickeningly predictable of all. The tiny seed of confusion in his mind was instantly obliterated by a massive, overwhelming tidal wave of pure, unadulterated greed. He completely ignored the insulting comments Mr. Harrison had just made about vultures and parasites. His brain entirely bypassed the defensive legal posturing and locked solely onto the massive pile of new money sitting right in front of him. My father's eyes practically bulged out of his skull with greedy delight. He immediately leaned far forward over the table, aggressively reaching for his folded financial power of attorney document. He licked his lips, his breathing suddenly becoming shallow and incredibly rapid. "Well," my father stammered, trying desperately to regain his authoritative corporate executive posture. "Well, that is certainly a massive game changer, Mr. Harrison. I had absolutely no idea David had secured such a massive secondary asset. This is incredible news for the family trust. I will ensure that this $2.5 million is heavily invested immediately." He looked at Jessica, offering her a wild, excited smile. "We can establish a robust family portfolio," my father continued, rambling quickly. Obviously, we will need to allocate a significant portion to expand Jessica's new property. We could easily build a massive guest house and perhaps secure a second luxury vacation home to keep the assets fully diversified. Just hand me the necessary release forms, Mr. Harrison, and I will sign them right now under the full authority of my legal proxy. I sat quietly in my chair, resting my hands protectively over my pregnant belly, watching the absolute monstrous reality of my family fully expose itself. They were sitting right across from me, actively planning how to spend my dead husband's millions, while completely ignoring the fact that I was the one carrying his child. My father actually reached his hand out across the table toward the open black binder, eagerly anticipating the transfer of multi-generational wealth. But before his fingers could even brush the parchment paper, Mr. Harrison slammed his own hand down violently onto the binder. The loud cracking sound echoed like a gunshot, causing my father to instantly yank his hand back in shock. "You will not touch a single dime of this money, Richard," Mr. Harrison snarled, his voice dropping into a terrifying predatory growl that visibly vibrated through the heavy wooden table. My father stared at him, completely bewildered, his greedy smile instantly shattering. "I have the financial power of attorney, my father," argued loudly, waving the folded document in the air like a magical shield. "I have the explicit legal right to manage all incoming financial assets for my daughter." Mr. Harrison stood up to his full, impressive height, towering ominously over my seated father. "You have absolutely nothing," Mr. Harrison declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "The sole exclusive beneficiaries of this executive policy are Claire and her unborn daughter. And this specific policy was intentionally drafted with a highly rigid corporate fiduciary protection clause." My parents stared at the senior attorney, completely uncomprehending. "A fiduciary protection clause?" my mother repeated nervously, her voice trembling slightly. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," Mr. Harrison explained, his sharp blue eyes cold and completely devoid of human mercy, "that if anyone commits fraud or abuses a legal mechanism to misappropriate Claire's primary funds, this firm's aggressive corporate litigation team is automatically retained to absolutely destroy them." He pointed a sharp, accusing finger directly at the digital recording device sitting in the center of the table. "You just sat in my boardroom and explicitly admitted on a recorded corporate audio track that you intentionally used a medical power of attorney to steal $500,000 from a pregnant widow simply to buy a house for a third party. Because of what you just proudly confessed on that tape, you are about to lose a lot more than just your access to this specific room." "What are you talking about?" my mother demanded, her voice rising into a shrill, panicked pitch that echoed harshly against the glass walls of the massive boardroom. Barbara clutched the strap of her brand-new designer handbag so tightly, her knuckles turned completely white. For her entire adult life, my mother had firmly believed that projecting an image of extreme wealth was an impenetrable defense against any actual, real-world consequences. She genuinely thought that if she wore expensive jewelry and carried a $3,000 purse, the rules that governed ordinary people simply would not apply to her. But sitting across from a senior corporate attorney who held the power to freeze multi-million-dollar assets, her expensive leather handbag suddenly looked incredibly cheap and entirely useless. Mr. Harrison did not raise his voice to match her hysterical tone. He simply reached into the heavy black binder and pulled out a thick stack of court-stamped legal documents. He spread them methodically across the polished mahogany table, aligning the edges with absolute, terrifying precision. A financial power of attorney is not a blank check for family wealth redistribution, Mr. Harrison explained, his voice ringing with absolute cold authority. It is an incredibly strict, highly regulated legal mechanism. When Claire signed that document, she legally designated you as her proxy. That means you were bound by state and federal law to act exclusively and entirely in her strict financial best interest. You were legally obligated to protect her assets for her specific survival and the survival of her unborn child. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, placing his large hands flat against the wooden table. By sitting in this exact room and proudly admitting on a recorded corporate audio track that you intentionally diverted her $500,000 to purchase a house for a completely healthy, fully capable third party, you have not just breached a minor civil contract. You have just formally confessed to felony breach of fiduciary duty and staggering grand larceny. My father's arrogant, commanding posture completely collapsed in a single, terrifying instant. The crisp, new charcoal gray suit he was wearing suddenly looked 3 sizes too big for his frame as his shoulders violently slumped forward. All the blood rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale, sickly, and suddenly very old. For my entire life, my father Richard had been a middle management bully. He was the kind of man who intimidated teenage retail workers, manipulated local car dealership salesmen, and always believed he was the absolute smartest guy in any given room. He thought he could bully a grieving pregnant widow because he had successfully bullied me for 28 years. But this was the very first time in his miserable life he was sitting across from a corporate apex predator who played for actual keeps. "You cannot prove malice," my father panicked, his voice cracking in a pathetic, high-pitched display of utter terror. "We are her family." We were acting out of profound love and protection. We were holding the money in a real estate investment to keep it safe from her emotional spending. No judge in this state is going to convict a grandfather for trying to help his daughters secure a stable financial future. Judges do not care about your highly twisted, toxic definition of family love. Richard Mr. Harrison countered smoothly, completely unbothered by my father's desperate legal flailing. Judges care about unauthorized electronic wire transfers and fraudulent property deeds. And because you were foolish enough to leave a massive digital footprint, we have the exact tracking numbers proving every single illegal step you took. Mr. Harrison completely dismissed my sweating, terrified father and turned his sharp, piercing blue gaze directly toward my younger sister. Jessica had been sitting frozen in her heavy leather chair, her oversized iced coffee completely forgotten. She was staring at the lawyer with wide, uncomprehending eyes. She was a lifestyle influencer who only understood aesthetic lighting and internet brand deals. She had absolutely no concept of federal financial law or the severe consequences of spending stolen money. Mr. Harrison slid a specific, heavily stapled document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Jessica. The front page bore a massive, bright red federal court stamp. Because the stolen $500,000 was traced directly from Claire's primary bank account straight to the title company that executed the deed of your new suburban property, Jessica, Mr. Harrison stated, his words falling like heavy iron anvils in the quiet room. This firm's corporate litigation team filed an emergency federal lien on that house at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. Jessica stared down at the red ink on the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "A lien," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What does that mean?" "It means you do not actually own that beautiful 4-bedroom property anymore, Jessica," Mr. Harrison explained with brutal, flawless clarity. The moment that federal document was stamped, the title was legally frozen. The estate of David officially owns that property now. To recover the stolen assets, and as the legally verified executor of her late husband's estate, Claire currently holds the absolute supreme authority over the deed. I sat back in my chair, resting both of my hands protectively over my pregnant belly. A fierce, glowing warmth spread through my entire chest. For the past 3 weeks, I had felt so incredibly weak and defenseless. I had cried myself to sleep, mourning my brilliant husband and terrified for my baby's future. But David had foreseen this exact moment. He had utilized his incredible intellect to build an impenetrable fortress around me from beyond the grave. And sitting in that boardroom, watching his corporate lawyers methodically dismantle the people who had exploited his death, was the most profoundly satisfying experience of my entire life. I looked directly into my younger sister's wide, terrified eyes. For 28 years, I had watched my parents hand her absolutely everything on a silver platter, while I worked myself to the absolute bone just to survive. They had literally tried to hand her my dead husband's life insurance on that exact same silver platter. It was finally time to take the platter back. "I am foreclosing on the property immediately," I said, my voice ice cold and completely steady, echoing clearly across the massive boardroom. "You have exactly 30 days to pack up your designer clothes and vacate my house." Jessica let out a blood-curdling shriek that practically shattered the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. It was not a cry of genuine sadness or remorse for the horrific crime her family had committed. It was the primal, enraged scream of a highly spoiled, entitled child having her absolute favorite, expensive toy violently ripped away from her grasp. "My house!" she screamed, slamming her manicured fists aggressively against the mahogany table. "You cannot take my house, Claire. I have massive brand deals lined up for next week. I have custom aesthetic furniture arriving tomorrow morning. I already posted the grand tour on my internet channel. You are completely ruining my entire brand and destroying my career because you are a jealous, bitter widow." The sheer audacity of her reaction was staggering. Even while staring directly down the barrel of a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit and federal grand larceny charges, her only actual concern was her fake internet reputation. She cared more about losing her imported marble kitchen island than she cared about the fact that her parents were currently facing severe prison time. But Jessica's hysterical meltdown was only the beginning of the absolute spectacular chaos that was about to erupt inside that room. Because when toxic people are finally cornered with absolutely nowhere left to hide, they do not magically band together in loving family unity. They violently turn on each other like starving, rabid animals. And as my parents began screaming at each other, trying desperately to shift the legal blame, the heavy boardroom doors were about to open one final time, bringing an unexpected guest that would ensure none of them walked out of that building as free citizens. The boardroom instantly devolved into absolute, spectacular chaos. The flawless, pristine illusion of the loving, supportive family that my parents had spent my entire life carefully constructing shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of my eyes. Jessica did not turn to my parents for comfort. She did not express any genuine sorrow or remorse for the horrific federal crime her family had just committed against me. Instead, she turned on them with the vicious, terrifying ferocity of a starving, cornered animal. "You promised me this was legal," Jessica shrieked, her face contorting into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of pure, selfish rage. "You told me you had the official power of attorney and that the money was entirely yours to spend. You completely ruined my life. I have massive brand sponsors coming to that house tomorrow morning to film a luxury home tour. What am I supposed to tell them? Am I supposed to tell my millions of followers that my idiot parents bought my property with stolen blood money?" Barbara desperately tried to reach out and grab her younger daughter's arm. "Sweetie, please calm down," my mother pleaded, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "We will hire a lawyer. We will figure this out." "Do not touch me," Jessica screamed, violently slapping my mother's hand away. "I am going to be a laughingstock on the internet. You are entirely destroying my brand." My mother stumbled backward as if she had been physically struck. The reality of the federal property lien and the impending criminal fraud charges finally pierced directly through her thick delusion of high society immunity. The horrible truth that her own favorite golden child cared more about an internet video than her parents' legal safety completely broke her spirit. Barbara began to violently hyperventilate. She clutched her $3,000 designer handbag tightly to her chest, as if the expensive imported leather could somehow magically shield her from a federal indictment. She sank heavily down into her leather ergonomic chair, gasping loudly for air and muttering over and over again that they could not possibly go to prison because they belonged to an exclusive suburban country club. While my mother was having a complete psychological breakdown, my father Richard was watching his entire arrogant kingdom burn to the absolute ground. He realized that bullying and intimidation would not work on a senior corporate attorney, so he desperately tried to pivot back to negotiation. He turned frantically toward Mr. Harrison, raising his hands in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "Listen to me, Mr. Harrison," my father begged, his voice cracking and pitching upward in sheer terror. "We can fix this right now. We can completely reverse the transaction today. I will sign the deed of the house directly over to David's estate right this very second. We will give the entire house back, no harm done. There is absolutely no need to involve federal authorities or ruin our lives over a simple family misunderstanding." "A simple family misunderstanding," Mr. Harrison repeated, his deep voice dripping with profound, icy disgust. "You utilized an emergency medical document to intentionally strip a pregnant, grieving widow of her survival funds so you could buy a luxury playground for your favorite child. That is not a misunderstanding, Richard. That is a highly calculated, predatory attack. And in the strict eyes of the law, the felony was officially committed the exact second you authorized that wire transfer. Returning the stolen property after you have been caught does not magically erase the grand larceny." Seeing that the corporate attorney was completely immovable, my father slowly turned his terrified, panicked eyes toward me. The arrogant, condescending patriarch who had stood proudly in that pristine suburban driveway just weeks ago and commanded me to let the adults handle the finances was completely gone. In his place was a broken, pathetic shell of a man, facing the absolute terrifying destruction of his own life. My father actually dropped to his knees. He sank down onto the expensive plush carpet of the corporate boardroom directly in front of my chair. It was the ultimate display of total humiliation. He clasped his trembling hands together, looking up at me with hot tears streaming rapidly down his face. "Claire, please," my father openly sobbed, his voice echoing loudly across the glass-walled room. "You have to stop this. You have to tell him to drop the charges right now. You have $2.5 million now, Claire. You are incredibly wealthy. You do not even need that suburban house anymore. We will go to federal prison. They will freeze our retirement accounts and take absolutely everything we own to pay the corporate restitution. We are your family. We are your parents. You cannot do this to us." I sat there, looking down at the weeping man kneeling on the floor. I felt the strong, steady kicks of my unborn daughter pushing actively against my ribs. For 28 long years, I had been the designated family peacekeeper. I was the reliable workhorse who always sacrificed my own happiness and financial stability to ensure my parents were comfortable and my sister was perfectly accommodated. I had swallowed my pride 1,000 times just to keep the peace in our household. If this massive confrontation had happened a year ago, I might have actually felt a suffocating wave of guilt. I might have actually tried to save them from the catastrophic consequences of their own toxic mistakes. But the naive, submissive woman they were crying to right now did not exist anymore. That woman died the exact same day her husband did. In her place was a grieving, intensely protective mother who finally understood her own fundamental worth. I slowly pushed my heavy chair back and stood up to my full height. The physical weight of my pregnancy grounded me, giving me a profound sense of absolute, unshakable power. I looked down at my father kneeling pitifully on the floor and my mother weeping hysterically in her chair. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow for them. I only felt a deep, clinical clarity. "You told me that I was far too emotional to handle my own money, Dad," I said, my voice completely steady and ringing with absolute crystal-clear authority. You stood in that driveway and you looked me dead in the eyes and told me that I would just foolishly waste David's life insurance. You explicitly said you were making an executive decision to protect the wealth because I had no head for finances. My father swallowed hard, his face pale and completely slick with terrified sweat. "Claire, please," he whispered, begging for a mercy he had never once shown me. "Well, I have finally learned my lesson," I continued, staring directly into his panicked, weeping eyes. "I am making a highly rational financial decision right now, and I think utilizing David's money to permanently remove toxic, predatory parasites from my daughter's life is the absolute best investment I will ever make." My father let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying his face in his hands as the absolute reality of his complete destruction finally crushed him. Right on absolute perfect cue, the heavy mahogany doors of the executive boardroom swung wide open. I did not even have to turn around to know exactly who was standing there. Mr. Harrison had made a very quiet, highly secure phone call while we were all sitting in the reception lobby earlier that morning. 2 heavily armed, uniformed police officers walked directly into the room, their radios crackling softly in the tense, silent air. The final, absolute wreckage of my family was officially here, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to run. I did not stay inside that glass-walled boardroom to watch the 2 armed police officers read my parents their Miranda rights. I did not need to witness the satisfying click of cold, heavy steel handcuffs snapping securely around my father's wrists, or listen to my mother hysterically sobbing as she was formally placed under federal arrest. I had already witnessed the exact moment their toxic empire completely crumbled, and that was entirely enough for me. I simply picked up my purse, placed one hand protectively over my pregnant belly, offered a quiet nod of profound gratitude to the senior corporate attorney, and walked straight out of those heavy mahogany doors. I rode the quiet mirrored elevator all the way down to the ground floor, stepped out through the revolving glass doors, and took my very first deep breath of fresh air in over 7 months. The heavy, suffocating dark cloud of grief and betrayal that had been crushing my chest since David passed away finally lifted. But while I was walking out into the bright, warm city sunlight, the absolute spectacular ruin of my family was violently accelerating behind me. Because my father had stolen money that was technically intertwined with a corporate executive benefits package, the district attorney did not treat this as a simple domestic family dispute. They treated it as a massive, malicious corporate fraud case. The legal hammer did not just fall on my parents. It completely obliterated them with the ruthless efficiency of a highly organized military strike. By the end of that exact same business day, Mr. Harrison and his aggressive litigation team had secured blanket freezing orders on absolutely every single financial account my parents possessed. My father's pristine retirement accounts, his premium stock portfolios, and the joint checking accounts my parents used to fund their lavish country club lifestyle were instantly locked by federal mandate. They were completely stripped of their financial power overnight. The massive sum of money they owed in corporate restitution and severe legal penalties vastly exceeded their actual liquid wealth. The high society suburban illusion they had spent 30 years carefully cultivating was brutally incinerated in a matter of hours. But the most deeply satisfying and visceral consequence of their horrific crime fell squarely onto the shoulders of my highly entitled younger sister. Jessica firmly believed that because she was a beautiful internet lifestyle influencer, she was magically immune to the harsh realities of the actual legal system. She genuinely thought she could simply cry on camera, post a highly edited apology video to her followers, and magically keep the massive $500,000 house my dead husband had unknowingly paid for. She was catastrophically wrong. Exactly 3 days after the explosive boardroom meeting on a bright, crisp Saturday morning, a county sheriff's deputy pulled his marked cruiser directly into the wide circular driveway of the beautiful 4-bedroom property. He was holding a stack of court-ordered eviction papers officially executed by David's estate. Jessica was inside the house, actively filming a morning routine video for her internet channel, completely ignoring the reality of the massive federal lien placed on the deed. When the heavy knock sounded at the front door, she opened it, wearing expensive silk pajamas and holding a perfectly frothed iced coffee. She expected to see a delivery driver dropping off more custom Italian furniture. Instead, she was greeted by a stern law enforcement officer who informed her she had exactly 2 hours to completely vacate the premises. Jessica threw an absolute historical temper tantrum right there on the pristine front porch. She screamed, she sobbed, and she loudly threatened to sue the local police department for ruining her massive brand launch. She desperately dialed my parents' phone numbers, begging them to fix the situation, but their cell phones had been confiscated as criminal evidence. She was completely, utterly alone. Because her bank accounts were suddenly cut off from my parents' endless financial bailouts, Jessica could not afford to hire professional movers. She could not afford to secure a nice luxury apartment on such incredibly short notice. She was forced to call a cheap discount moving van and frantically shove her expensive imported aesthetic furniture, her designer wardrobes, and her professional lighting equipment into a dirty rented storage unit located in a highly undesirable part of the city. The wealthy suburban neighbors stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, watching in silent, profound judgment as the crying internet influencer was physically escorted off the property by the sheriff. The gorgeous 4-bedroom house that was supposed to be her ultimate status symbol was immediately boarded up and secured with heavy padlocks pending the official corporate asset recovery sale. Jessica lost absolutely everything she valued in a single humiliating morning. Meanwhile, the psychological destruction of my parents was proving to be even more devastating than their total financial ruin. When deeply toxic people are finally backed into an inescapable corner, facing severe federal prison time, they do not magically band together in a beautiful display of unconditional family loyalty. They completely, violently turn on each other. My parents were initially released on a massive bail bond, secured against the remaining equity of their own primary residence. But the immense, crushing stress of the federal indictment instantly shattered their marriage. Without the buffer of their stolen money to distract them, their true, ugly natures violently clashed. My father, Richard, furiously blamed my mother for the entire grand larceny scheme. He loudly claimed that Barbara was the one who constantly pushed him to financially support Jessica's ridiculous internet career, and that he was only trying to keep his demanding wife happy. My mother, Barbara, aggressively retaliated by throwing my father entirely under the legal bus. She screamed that he was the designated proxy holding the financial power of attorney, and that he was the arrogant fool who actually logged into the banking portal and executed the illegal wire transfer. She blamed his massive, unchecked ego for blinding him to the obvious legal dangers. They spent their days trapped inside their quiet suburban home, screaming vicious insults at each other, completely isolated from their wealthy country club friends who had immediately abandoned them the second the scandalous fraud charges hit the local news. Because their personal assets were entirely frozen by the corporate litigation team, they could not afford to hire the aggressive, high-powered defense attorneys they desperately needed. The arrogant man who loved to brag about his superior intellect and the woman who looked down her nose at anyone wearing cheap clothes were suddenly forced to rely on overworked public defenders to save them from a federal penitentiary. The beautiful, loving family unit they had tried to build by actively robbing a pregnant widow had completely burned to the absolute ground in less than a week. They had sacrificed their relationship with their oldest daughter, they had permanently destroyed their own secure retirement, and they had completely ruined their favorite child's future, all for a temporary, fleeting taste of unearned wealth. As I watched the news of their impending criminal trial unfold from the absolute safety and comfort of my own quiet life, I realized that karma does not always work on a delayed schedule. Sometimes karma wears a sharp navy pinstripe suit and completely destroys your enemies right in front of your eyes. And as the dust finally began to settle over the ashes of my former family, I prepared to take the recovered funds and build an absolutely beautiful, untouchable reality for my daughter. It has been exactly 6 months since that explosive morning inside the glass-walled corporate boardroom, and my entire world looks fundamentally different today. As I sit here right now, I am gently rocking my beautiful, healthy 3-month-old baby girl in the quiet, peaceful nursery of our brand new home. The late afternoon sunlight is pouring through the large bay windows, casting a warm, golden glow over the soft white carpets and the carefully painted pastel walls. This house is a sprawling, beautiful sanctuary located in a highly secure, quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall pine trees and friendly neighbors. I bought this property outright in cash, using a portion of the $2.5 million executive life insurance policy that David left behind. Every single time I walk through the heavy oak front door or hear my daughter softly cooing in her crib, I feel an overwhelming wave of profound gratitude for the brilliant, protective husband who anticipated my worst nightmare and built an impenetrable financial fortress around us from beyond the grave. The legal and financial resolution of the horrific crime my family committed was handled with absolute, flawless precision by Mr. Harrison and his aggressive corporate litigation team. Because my father had proudly confessed to felony grand larceny on a recorded corporate audio track, the legal proceedings moved incredibly fast. We did not have to endure a lengthy, agonizing civil trial. The emergency federal lien that the firm placed on my sister's massive suburban property remained fully intact until the district attorney officially transferred the legal deed directly back into my name as the sole verified executor of David's estate. Once I legally possessed the title to the 4-bedroom house my parents had stolen for Jessica, I immediately placed it on the real estate market. I did not want to keep a property tainted by their toxic greed and profound betrayal. The house sold in less than 2 weeks to a lovely young, hard-working couple who were expecting their second child. When the final closing paperwork was signed and the funds were officially cleared, Mr. Harrison took that recovered $500,000 and placed it directly into a highly secure, untouchable trust fund established entirely for my newborn daughter. That money will sit and quietly accumulate massive compound interest until she turns 25 years old, ensuring she will always have a stable foundation to build her own dreams upon. My parents thought they were cleverly stealing my child's future, but all they actually did was inadvertently secure her a multi-million-dollar financial empire. The current daily reality for my parents and my younger sister, however, is a spectacular, breathtaking display of pure, unadulterated karma. Because the local district attorney decided to prosecute their actions as a severe malicious corporate fraud case, they were shown absolutely zero leniency in the criminal justice system. They attempted to negotiate a quiet plea deal to avoid jail time, but the prosecuting attorneys completely refused to drop the felony charges. My father, Richard, and my mother, Barbara, are currently waiting for their official criminal trial to begin next month, and their court-appointed public defenders have already warned them to expect significant federal prison sentences. Their total financial ruin is absolute and entirely irreversible. Because the massive corporate restitution and severe legal penalties vastly exceeded the actual liquid value of their pristine suburban home and their premium retirement portfolios, they were forced to declare total catastrophic bankruptcy. They lost their luxury leased vehicles, they lost their exclusive country club memberships, and they lost every single wealthy friend they had ever made. The people who used to look down their noses at my cramped, drafty apartment are currently living in a tiny, miserable 2-bedroom rental unit located in a highly undesirable industrial sector of the city. My father, who always arrogantly believed he was a superior corporate mastermind, is now working the graveyard shift, stocking heavy inventory at a local logistics warehouse just to afford basic groceries and keep the electricity turned on. My mother, who previously refused to wear anything other than expensive imported designer labels, now spends her days clipping cheap grocery coupons and crying over the absolute ashes of her completely destroyed high society illusion. But perhaps the most deeply poetic justice fell directly onto the shoulders of my highly entitled sister Jessica. When she was violently evicted from the luxury home my dead husband unknowingly paid for, she desperately tried to salvage her internet lifestyle brand. She actually sat down in her dirty, rented storage unit and filmed a highly emotional video, attempting to paint herself as the ultimate victim of a cruel, jealous older sister. She thought her millions of internet followers would immediately rally behind her and send her massive donations. She was catastrophically wrong. Because the federal fraud charges and the corporate property liens were strictly matters of public record, several investigative internet journalists quickly uncovered the actual truth. They published the official court documents proving that Jessica's beautiful aesthetic home was purchased with money stolen directly from a grieving pregnant widow. The public internet backlash was immediate, vicious, and utterly, entirely absolute. Her major corporate brand sponsors instantly dropped her contracts, completely terrified of being associated with a convicted fraud family. Her internet channels were flooded with tens of thousands of angry, disgusted comments, until she was finally forced to permanently delete her entire digital presence. Today, the beautiful golden child, who firmly believed she was destined for a life of effortless luxury and massive online fame, is working as a junior retail associate at a busy downtown coffee shop. She spends 40 hours a week wearing a stained uniform, wiping down sticky tables, and politely fetching expensive iced lattes for the exact same wealthy demographic she used to desperately try to influence. She has absolutely zero savings, a mountain of unpaid credit card debt, and she has to ride the public bus back to our parents' cramped, miserable apartment every single night. I completely blocked their phone numbers and their email addresses the exact same afternoon I walked out of that corporate glass boardroom, and I have not spoken a single word to any of them since. Sometimes well-meaning people will hear this story and they will gently suggest that I should eventually consider forgiving them. They argue that holding on to a grudge is unhealthy and that at the end of the day, blood is thicker than water, and family is absolutely everything. But what those people fail to fundamentally understand is that I am not holding on to a toxic grudge. I am simply holding on to a massive, impenetrable boundary. The brutal, honest truth that took me 28 agonizing years to finally learn is that sharing biological DNA with someone does not magically guarantee they possess your best interests at heart. My parents did not love me for who I was as a person. They loved me for the quiet, absolute convenience I consistently provided them. They loved my submissive silence, my desperate willingness to keep the peace, and my endless capacity to absorb their toxic financial abuse so they could comfortably spoil their favorite child. When they logged into my banking portal and callously drained my survival funds while I was lying in a hospital bed mourning my husband, they permanently severed any biological obligation I ever owed them. They taught me the harsh, terrifying reality that some people will happily watch you completely drown just so they can comfortably stand on your shoulders to keep their own shoes dry. I lost the only family I ever knew, but in exchange, I gained absolutely everything else. I found my spine. I found my protective roar. I transformed from a passive, terrified victim into a fierce, immovable mother who completely understands her own fundamental worth. David may have been tragically taken from this earth far too soon, but his incredible, brilliant love continues to actively protect us every single day. He made absolutely sure that his girls would never be victimized or exploited again, and honoring his beautiful memory by living a peaceful, happy, secure life is a massive, profound joy I will carry with me forever. And that is my complete story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the absolute end of this incredible journey. If this story deeply resonated with you, and if you have ever had to finally stand up to toxic people who only viewed you as an endless financial resource, I want you to know that you are absolutely not alone. Setting firm, unapologetic boundaries is never an act of betrayal against your family. It is a fundamental, beautiful act of profound loyalty to yourself. You are completely allowed to walk away from people who actively hurt you. The most profoundly shattering lesson one can learn in the immediate, suffocating aftermath of unimaginable grief is that the very people who share your blood and whom you implicitly trust to protect you in your most vulnerable state can sometimes be the exact opportunistic predators who will callously exploit your tragedy for their own superficial financial gain, proving with devastating clarity that biological relation does not inherently guarantee unconditional love or basic human decency. However, this harrowing realization also brings with it an immensely powerful awakening, teaching you that setting ruthless, impenetrable boundaries is not an act of selfish betrayal against your family, but rather the most fundamental, necessary act of fierce devotion to your own survival and the future safety of your children. Because when toxic individuals eagerly strip away your security to fund their own delusions of grandeur, just as the parents in this narrative did when they stole the financial lifeline of a widowed mother to buy a meaningless backdrop for a spoiled sibling, they inadvertently strip away the lifelong conditioning that previously forced you into submissive silence, thereby empowering you to utilize every legal, strategic, and emotional weapon at your disposal to completely dismantle their false empires and reclaim your stolen worth with absolute, unapologetic authority. A truth that perfectly illustrates how the brilliant protective foresight of a loved one can reach beyond the grave to deliver spectacular, undeniable karma to those who mistook your temporary heartbreak for permanent weakness. So if you have ever had to summon the terrifying courage to permanently sever ties with the people who were supposed to cherish you, please remember that you are never alone in this fight. And make sure to subscribe to Olivia Tells Stories for more deeply satisfying narratives about transforming absolute devastation into unbreakable personal strength.
Thought you were already taken off a few hours ago. Well, I mean, I could always do it later. I mean, I want to do it today. You know what? You do you, and then you message me in a couple of hours if you're around. Because I'm happy to just keep doing this. But I do want, but I do want to play that game today, so I may as well stream it.
Exit right. Turn left.
Come on.
Keep left. And in, turn left. Turn
Anyway, I saw some people calling it. You know the whole game. Oh, okay. You know the game. Cool. Yeah, oh, well, basically, like, I mean, you know, like, I'm interested in it. Yeah, like, I mean, I kind of like to go into games not knowing anything about them, but I did actually have a look. I was like, what's the score with this, you know, why is this coming up on my Steam page and that? Anyway, I had a bit of a quick look. Seems really interesting. Yeah, and I saw people calling it like the COVID-19 game or whatever, COVID game and stuff like that. That was kind of funny. Actually, I saw one lady, like one female streamer, I saw like little bits, right? So she's like